My family moved around a lot when I was a child, mainly due to my dad's job. We moved 4 to 5 times before I was 6 years old. My mom wanted some stability for the family, which at this point comprised of her, my dad, myself, and my younger brother. So, in 1994, my old man went and bought an old derelict farm that was situated in a rural area in the southwest of the UK, a mile from the nearest village and a quarter mile from our neighbors. He purchased it at a property auction, and we had no prior viewing, just the pictures on display at the auction house. This place was really old, and comprised of a few large fields and 2 interconnected yards filled with outbuildings and a derelict house. It had been a working farm in various forms for 500 years or so, and the house itself was 250 years old. We spent a year living elsewhere whilst the renovations took place, but would often go there on weekends to run around and to play. The first day we entered the dusty, half-collapsed 2-story house, we realized that the previous occupants had left loads of their stuff behind. The house had been vacated 25 to 30 years prior. Everything was dusty, moldy, and falling to pieces. And some of the highlights were dressing tables filled with old clothes and makeup. A wall in one room was plastered with rosettes won in equine competitions, and hanging from the banister at the top of the stairs were a row of small string nooses covered in fur. It's a barbaric but not uncommon way for farm folk to get rid of unwanted kittens, apparently. Now, this wasn't paranormal in any way, but Jesus Christ, it was a unnerving thing to see in an already creepy-looking house. It would take far too long to list everything that happened, so I'll list some highlights below before ending with what I consider to be the strangest occurrence. Loud bangs, loud enough to make you think someone had tipped over a wardrobe or something. Footsteps running up and down the long wooden hallway. Cold spots and breezy points throughout the house that changed from day to day. One night my grandparents were house sitting, and before they went to bed, they did a quick lock check. One room at the end of the house was filled with a thick mist. It was a clear night. All the doors and windows were shut, and the mist was exclusive to that room. They noped out of there and stayed at their own place that night. The next day, everything was back to normal. After living there for 6 months, my mom actually called the village priest in to bless the place. We weren't a religious family, but she was really at a loss about how to cope with everything. The priest arrived and then proceeded to sprinkle holy water in every room of the house. Once that was done, Mom walked him out to his car, and as soon as they got out of the house, he turned to her and said, "There's an incredibly dark presence in this house, and I'm never setting foot here again. I don't know what to suggest. I'm really sorry. Good luck." And then he got into his car and sped off. He had apparently been fairly neutral during the blessing, but as soon as he got out of the house, he went pale, and his whole demeanor changed instantly. Things got a lot more chill after a medium came around and told Mom to kind of embrace it, which she did. There was always this nagging feeling that you were never alone. It didn't feel malevolent, it felt observational, and sometimes sad in a wistful way. It's still very strange. Anyway, the weirdest thing that happened actually occurred during the renovation phase. Dad and his work crew had removed all of the old possessions from the house and made a huge bonfire in the yard. They burned it over the course of a few days until it was just a steaming pile of ash. The following weekend, my mom took me and my bro over for a picnic and to run around. We were feral little bastards and we needed it. At one point, Mom sat in a chair not far from the bonfire and noticed an envelope on the big mound of ash. Despite being in the center of this pile, the envelope had inexplicably not burned up. Mom could tell that there was something heavier than paper in the envelope when she opened it up, and an amethyst crystal dropped out along with the letter. The date on the letter was sometime in the early 60s, and was written by the childhood sweetheart of a girl who had lived at that house with her parents. It was a letter of condolence to the parents. Turns out, the girl had sadly ended her life in her room when she was around the age of 18. Her ex-boyfriend had heard about it and sent the parents a really sweet letter expressing his love, grief, and condolences. He also sent the amethyst crystal, as that was the girl's favorite stone. My bedroom had been the girl's room. This was evident from the contents when we first got there. My wardrobe was in the corner by the window looking out over the farm. I could never linger there for too long. The part of the room just felt unpleasant and tense. I've since wondered if that's the spot where the girl took her life. I guess the story of the letter isn't very paranormal, but the fact that the letter survived the bonfire is wild to me. So, yeah. We lived there for 6 years or so, and then moved again after my parents split up. The house has changed hands at least twice in the last 20 years. I live about 2 hours from this place nowadays, and my girlfriend and I are tempted to go visit and see how it's doing. I'm sure the owners would love to be regaled with odd anecdotes about the property. Just to clarify, aside from the weird feelings and the random bangs and noises, my brother and I were largely unaware of things that happened. We were only told later in life, thank God. Hey guys, I hope this is the right place for this. I'm a 30-year-old male, and I'd like to start off by saying that I don't really believe in this type of thing, or at least, I didn't before. Some people in my family have always thought the paranormal to be real and claimed to have experiences, but until recently I've always chucked it up to their imaginations. Odd things have happened throughout my life, but I think I've always just shrugged it off and applied some sort of logic to it. Things like, this house is just really old and makes noise. But I can't logically come up with a reason as to why certain things are happening anymore. I guess everything started around Thanksgiving of 2017. After about 25 years in the same house, my family, mom, grandparents, aunt, and I decided to abandon the family home and move out of state. We immediately regretted the decision and quickly moved back to Georgia, into a new 3-bedroom home. I took the entire basement as a bedroom, set up a hammock, and settled in quickly. After a few nights in the new place, I stopped having dreams. It seemed like no matter how much rest I got, it was just never enough. Apparently this was happening to the rest of the family as well, but we never really spoke about it. A few more weeks go by, and then my mother started losing weight out of nowhere. My grandparents' health started to decline, and my aunt began shutting herself in her room. By the end of the first year, my grandma, who only went from her bed to her chair, somehow broke her back from just sitting, but had bruises all over her back. My mom had lost somewhere around 60 pounds. My aunt had pretty much went crazy, and my grandpa grew really irritable. It wasn't much longer after that my aunt disappeared and got admitted into a, excuse my choice of words, nut house. Once she got out, she just refused to come back and moved out. Around this time, I started having nightmares. Around October of 2019, those nightmares got so bad that I hadn't had a full night's rest in several weeks. Then, one night, each time I woke up, I felt paralyzed and numb. It was like somehow all of my limbs were numb and cold. Then, one night this happened, I saw a figure. I was a nervous wreck for a few days after that. I remember telling one of my coworkers, and they told me to sage and pray over the house. I remember looking that sort of thing up to understand the whole point of it, and I was skeptical, but I did it anyway one night when my family was out. I walked every room of the house, upstairs and down. I even went into the bathrooms. I burned sage and prayed for what seemed like easily an hour or two. Later that evening, my family came home and were none the wiser. However, that night was different. It was quiet, peaceful. I remember it so perfectly because I think that was the first time since we moved in that I had managed to sleep comfortably. Unfortunately, the next morning, everyone else in the house had gotten extremely sick. My grandpa and I were the only ones who weren't admitted into the hospital that day. Luckily enough, everyone recovered, and things were fine for a couple of months. Then, before the pandemic went into full swing, 3 other family members moved into the house with us and took over the living room, great aunt and second cousins. With them came several dogs, who were always playful and calm. Then, for who knows why, stuff started happening again. Mom started to lose weight again. Grandma and Grandpa's health went downhill, and I started having nightmares again. The other 3 family members began to bicker and argue like I had never heard from them, and their dogs started barking at all hours of the night. This continued on for months, and the situation just kept getting worse. Everyone was growing irritable and miserable. Eventually, those extra family members moved out, and I began spending less time at the house, even though we were going through a pandemic. I met my now wife and moved out rather quickly with her. My family stayed in that house, though, and I just visited on the weekends. A few months later, my mom had lost well over 140 pounds, but the doctor said she was healthy. Also, during this time, my grandma's health had gotten so bad that she was admitted into a nursing/physical therapy facility. She spent about 3 to 4 months there before coming home. During that time, I had gotten married, and sadly, a week later, my grandma had passed away. And that was in the beginning of summer in 2021. That left my mom and grandpa in the house. I can't really speak on if they had any weird occurrences between that time and now, because I didn't live there anymore. They never spoke about those kinds of things, and when I visited, I never brought it up or asked questions. I didn't see the point or make any weird connections. That was until recently. Sadly, my grandpa passed in February of 2023. Since then, my mom has finally moved in with my sister and is taking her time getting her stuff from the house. Well, it's been about 3 weeks since the funeral, and as of today, I think I'm terrified. I don't know what to think or do other than sit here and draw connections to strange things that have happened the last few years. Heck, that's why I'm here sharing all this information. Last Thursday, I was driving home from work at roughly 3:10 p.m. I was passing by the old house my mom was moving out of, and I saw someone I didn't recognize from a distance. The road was maybe a football field away from the house, so it was hard to tell who it was. Once I got home, had dinner, and spent time with my family, I called my mom and asked her what she had moved out that day. Apparently, she hadn't been there at all that day, and started freaking out thinking someone was trying to steal from the house. She, my sister, and some of my sister's friends went up there to check out the place. Later that night, my mom called me back to tell me what had happened. She said that no doors or windows had been broken, but the doggy door cover was ripped off, and the house had some strange, nasty cologne-like smell all throughout. While they were there, none of them felt safe. But they searched the house to see if anyone was there, and found no one. My sister apparently got tired of looking around, so she went into the pantry to find that all of the snacks and drinks were missing. Apparently a huge fuss was made, and they thought someone had broken in just to steal food, until my sister and her friends heard some strange sounds. Then, eventually, they heard a voice telling them to get out. This scared the crap out of them, and they went outside immediately. They were freaking out and yelling at my mother to get out too, claiming there was a ghost. But my mom didn't hear anything, thought they were being dramatic, and started poking fun at them. She even began talking, cursing, and threatening the quote-unquote ghost all throughout the house to prove a point. I guess this was a bad idea. Something scared my mother so bad that she just kind of shut down and refused to explain. After we got off the phone, I told my wife about it and laughed a little. I honestly thought that they were just hearing things. But then something happened today. I got off work early, and I went by the old house, alone. I wanted to get some tools that I left in the garage, but I never made it. You see, I pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and felt something weird. Once I got to a breezeway door, before I could even reach for the doorknob, I felt like how I used to feel in the middle of the night, numb and paralyzed. I also felt empty, like I had been hollowed out. Then I felt a lot of pressure, like I was carrying a really heavy weight. I got scared, so scared that I started trembling. My first instinct was to get back into my car, so I ran to it and I left. I pulled into a nearby gas station, but by this time I was a nervous wreck. It took me nearly an hour to calm down. Once I did, I went in and got me something to drink and some gas. And for some reason, I got the bright idea to go back. The second time I pulled into the driveway and parked my car, I grabbed my gun out of the glove box and went to go into the house once again. But it was the same thing all over. But the feeling was so much worse. I couldn't see anything, but something was there. It felt giant and threatening. That presence was so overwhelming, overpowering, and just outright awful. Even with my gun in hand, I turned and ran back to the car. This time I nearly wrecked on the way out of the driveway. I was headed home, but instead I went to a friend's place. I didn't tell her anything about what was going on, just that I needed her to come see something with me. I felt like she would understand better than me. The reason I went to her was because she comes from a Haitian family, whose roots run deep. She doesn't practice voodoo, but knows about it and has several family members who swear by it and live that lifestyle. But she's also one of those energy and vibe type people. She knew something was wrong with me, and was worried because I wouldn't explain, but she came with me anyway. As soon as I pulled into the driveway of that old home, she began to cry and freak out. I hadn't told her anything, and she loved my family, so there was no reason for her to act that way. She started yelling at me to leave, so I did. As I was driving back to her place, she started yelling at me and punching me in the shoulder over and over. She was angry at me, but eventually she calmed down and we started to talk. She told me to never bring her back to a place like that again. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "A place that has an evil spirit." I asked her a bunch of questions and apologized before dropping her off. I got home maybe 3 or 4 hours ago. I originally came online to research stuff, somehow ended up on this forum and just thought I should share. Truth be told, I really hope this is just mine and my family's minds playing tricks on us. Maybe we're just grief-stricken. We might just all be a little crazy. But through all of this, the one thing I know that is real is that terrifying sense of fear that I felt today. And it definitely has my nerves shook. My only paranormal experience was about 30 years ago, and it's the only real experience that I've ever had. I, along with 2 other friends, moved into an old Californian-style bungalow house, which was a 1910-era 3-bedroom house. We were all 25 years old at the time. It was located inner city and had an adjoining massive workshop/shed that used to be a mechanic shop and a petrol station, with a petrol bowser on the footpath back in the 1920s. The monthly rent was quite cheap for the area and the size of the block, although the workshop was only used for storage now, and the owner had a fair bit of junk in it. One night, about 8 p.m., I was sitting in my bedroom at the desk, which was right next to the door, which was open, and this opened into the main hallway. At the right of my door was the main entrance to the house from the outside. Across was another bedroom, and to the left the hall split in 2 directions. One to the lounge room and the other went to the kitchen. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and also had the back door, which led to the backyard. And across that yard was the massive old mechanic's shed. Because we lived inner city, our security was OTT. The back door had 3 deadbolts and a chain latch. It was always locked as it was winter and the backyard was wet and muddy. Both of my housemates were out that night, and I was playing a game on my PC when I saw a guy walk down the hall, about 5 feet in front of me. I said, "Hey." He stopped briefly, turned his head ever so slightly. He was wearing blue jeans and a red plaid patterned shirt. He was about 20 years old, had lovely blonde shoulder-length hair. As I was playing a game, I didn't fully engage with him, but when I noticed he stopped, I then said, "How's it going?" and then returned to viewing the monitor with the game that I was playing. I thought it was a friend of one of my housemates, and I expected to see one of them walk past shortly. But no one did. This guy may have looked at me, but since I returned my gaze back to the screen, I'm not 100% sure. Then he just slowly walked down the hall and into the kitchen. I then realized that I never heard the front door open, and all of a sudden, every hair on my body sharply rose up. I said, "Hello?" and still got no response. So I then walked into the kitchen to see who this guy was, and there was no one there. He could not have come back out without me seeing him, and the back door had 3 locked deadbolts on it. I was so shocked, but curious too. I spent the next half an hour walking around the house, out into the backyard, in the shed, but I didn't see anyone. A week later, I went across the road from our house to the barber shop to get a haircut. The barber had been in business for generations. His father and his father before him ran the business. I told him the story and he called his father in from out back of the shop. His father told me that back in the 1940s, when the mechanic shop was in full operation, a young man was working under a car which was on a hoist. It malfunctioned, and the young man was killed. Quite a few previous residents have seen this young man in the house, and they got scared and moved out, hence the cheap rent. We stayed for another 2 years, but I never saw him again. I was so disappointed. I would have loved to have seen him again and even tried to communicate with him. I've never seen anything paranormal since. As far as ghosts go, this was so believable. He had a solid form. He acknowledged me when I spoke to him by stopping and turning his head. I just wish that I had kept looking at him more, and I wish I had more encounters like that. One per lifetime is way too few. It's not fair, and I think I've been ripped off. When I was around the age of 6, my mom started to clean our church every week to help out. During this time, we were renting a farmhouse where me and my 2 older brothers experienced quite a few paranormal events. But my parents never gave it the light of day, due to them being Christian and very conservative. One day, my mom was cleaning the church, and my brothers and I tagged along since my dad was working. While my mom cleaned, we decided to play hide and seek, since the church was empty. Eventually, I was the seeker looking for my brother, and I remember walking down a long hallway. Since the church was closed, and my mom was just cleaning the room where the sermons were held, all of the other lights were off except for the emergency lights. When I was walking in the very dim hall, for some reason, I felt the need to look up. And from that moment, I can't get the image of what I saw out of my head. There was an all-black figure around the size of a 6 or 7-year-old. The figure was crawling on the ceiling, so I was looking at its back. Only it had noticed me, so it had twisted its head all the way around to see me. The face was blurry since it was dark, but I could make out an almost cartoonish smile staring at me. And I remember the eyes being not human-like at all. The weird thing about this is, despite how creepy I remember the figure being, my 6-year-old self was not scared at all. I remember thinking to myself, how did my brother get up there? And then I felt the need to leave the hallway. When I saw its face, I didn't feel my stomach drop, nor did I feel scared or threatened. I just felt like whatever I saw wanted me to just move along. To this day, I don't have any idea what it was. My brothers called me crazy and said, there can't be any demons in a church since it's protected by God. And my parents agreed. The older I get, the more I wonder if it was just a dream that made itself into a memory. It just feels so real when I think about it, and I'm able to describe it in such great detail. I don't really remember any other times we played hide and seek, but this one sticks out. I know that children are more likely to have paranormal experiences, and my brothers also had things happen to them, but it was at the house. Why did I see something at our church? After doing some research, I found out that the church has been around since 1873, and I remember that there is a cemetery on the land as well, with the same name as the church. I'm happy to talk about some of the other things that happened in the house, but I don't remember much. Really only the things that my brothers have told me. The house was very old and in the middle of nowhere. It was an old farmhouse that someone purchased and had renovated. The barn was a no-go zone and gave us all the creeps. The cows on the land also acted very strange, and the house just had this weird vibe overall. Let me start this off by saying that it's kind of a long story to get to the point of it, so I am sorry. I'm a 20-year-old male, and when I was 5, we moved from our trailer home deep in the forest and got a house closer to town. This would be the house that we stayed in for the next decade and more. My grandfather was a preacher, and he took his wife and children, one of those children being my mom, on a mission trip to Belize, where they would reside for the next few years to come. During that time, I've been told my grandfather had to perform an exorcism, and had dealt with many spiritually traumatic events. My mother told me that when she came back to the US, she had a necklace that her friend in Belize gave her as a departure gift. This necklace seemed to be bringing in negative happenings. She said she would see figures move out of the corner of her vision, hear footsteps in the house when no one was home, even hear voices talking in vacant rooms of the house. She decided it was best to get rid of the necklace, so she did, and everything seemingly went back to normal. Fast forward to when I was 8 years old. I had separation anxiety very badly as a kid, upon other forms of anxiety. I always knew if my dad was awake in the living room late at night playing his Xbox, or if he was in bed, because I always would call out from my room to make sure he was there, just out of fear of him not being there. My older brother, my little brother, and I all shared a room at the time. My dad said that when they first moved into the house, he always got chills going in there, and wasn't sure why. He said there was an old chair and a vintage recorder that sat on top of it. He said that he couldn't explain why, but the room just gave him a creepy feeling. Anyways, one night, both my brothers and I had already fallen asleep, and my dad had turned off his Xbox and went to bed. There was a bifold door closed across the room from my bed that I was always afraid of as a kid, thinking that there were ghosts in it or something. So, that night, as I was struggling to fall asleep, I watched that closet intently, almost fading into sleep when, out of nowhere, the open closet slammed shut by itself, as if a grown man had slammed it in a fit of rage. Now, I was terrified, and a bit shook up. Half hiding under my blanket, I stared into the closet all night. Nothing was in it. No one was playing a trick on me. There were no drafts in the room. Needless to say, I became pretty paranoid as a kid. Fast forward to when I was 16, I had developed a bad stomach issue leading me to think I may have developed Crohn's disease. Afraid and Googling symptoms all night, I started to fade asleep. I remember the last thing I could think that I was being punished for my wrongdoings. And when I fell asleep, I had a dream that I was in a 2-story house that I didn't recognize, and found myself running up the stairs, somehow knowing that my mother was in bed in one of the rooms. I ran into the room to find her, and saw her lying in the bed. She seemed sick, like she had a fever, and standing by her bed was a tall, looming thing. In the dream, I could see more details on this being, but once I woke up, all I could remember from it was a black void and a tall figure. I told it to leave my mom alone, and it turned to me and said, "My name is Baal." Baal being a real demon. I told it to F off, and then I woke up. When I woke up, the entire house had flooded during my time of sleeping and having that dream. The septic system had completely backflowed through every drain in the house, causing a rough day of work to deal with the flooding and the plumbing. And from that day forward, I've had horrible stomach issues, and I can't help but remember that night every time I get sick and throw up. I still get those feelings that it's watching me when I sleep at that house. Thank you for your time, and I love your channel, Raven. Well, thank you. This happened a few nights ago when I was trying to fall asleep. I've been on holiday since near the end of November. In South Africa, around Christmas time is our summer holiday due to us being in the southern hemisphere. I normally stay up a lot later than anyone else in my house, playing video games or watching YouTube or whatever. This night, I was lying in bed with my phone at about 1 a.m. when I decided that it was a bit late, and that I should try to fall asleep. As I was lying down, I was manually breathing when I noticed that the sound of breathing sounded slightly out of sync with my actual breath. I felt my heart slowly begin to race, but I tried to remain calm and brush it off. In an attempt to help myself feel better and fall asleep easily, I decided to hold my breath to see that the breathing sound stops too. So I did. Except the sound of breathing continued. The sound sounded like it was literally coming from directly underneath my bed. I also never noticed this sound suddenly appearing, meaning that if it was always there, it had been in sync with my breath until now. I began to freak out and thought that somehow someone was underneath my bed, even though I knew that if they had bad intentions, they would have done something already, since everyone else was supposedly asleep. This made me think that there wasn't anyone under my bed, but I still didn't know how the breath continued when I had stopped breathing. My right ear was blocked at the time and my left ear was against the pillow, meaning that whatever I heard would almost definitely be heard through my left ear. Lifting my head up, I heard the noise continue. It was snoring from my dad in his bedroom. I couldn't help but notice that the snoring, while going at the same pace as the breathing, sounded absolutely nothing like it. Putting my head back on the pillow, I didn't hear the noise anymore. Just my dad snoring. What do you think? Was it really his snoring somehow being distorted to sound like normal breathing? And like it was coming from under my bed? Or was it something else? Something more sinister and evil. So that, my friends, was a collection of some chilling paranormal stories. Paranormal stories are always good, always intriguing, and always quite creepy, to be honest with you. It's where my channel started, as you all, most of you know by now. And because they are so entertaining and intriguing, I will continue to invest my time in them. Yeah. Hopefully you all enjoyed them. If you did, please do consider hitting that subscribe button, as I do stories like this quite frequently. You can also hit the thumbs up button, which tells me you like to this video specifically. That's quite helpful. You can also go down below the video and leave me a comment, letting me know your thoughts on the content, the stories, or just leave me a comment letting me know how you're doing. I appreciate those too. There's also the super thanks, and Patreon memberships, which is extra stuff for the channel. Never expected, but always appreciated. One more thing I wanted to mention here, because I noticed it didn't get a lot of eyes on the community tab, which is that I am doing the first annual Greetings for 2024 card exchange, I guess we can call it. It may not be annual, but it's the first one, so we're going to call it the first annual, which is kind of contradictory, because if it's annual, it can't be the first. You know how that works. But anyways, in the community tab on this channel, I made a post with an address, kind of. It's a P.O. box. If you send me a greeting card, a card of any sort, a short letter, anything like that, to that P.O. box, you will, in return, get a best wishes card from me. It's just kind of a way to make a little more physical communication with the community that I've created here, that we've established. And I think postcards are a neat way to do that. And I've had this P.O. box for over a year now, and we're not just under a year, actually. And I've never done anything with it, so I wanted to go ahead and do this. So again, if you send me a postcard, I will send you a postcard. This is simply just for best wishes for the new year. It's not like a Christmas card thing, obviously. It's just best wishes. To wish us all and manifest a great 2024. There is an addendum on the post, but I will add the addendum here. Please do not send gifts to the box. Do not send anything of monetary value. I do not want them. I do not need them. Do not send gifts or anything of monetary value. This is simply and solely for the postcard exchange. Let's keep it at that, please. Yeah. Anyways, all that said, friends, I hope you remember you are loved, you are valid, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and sleep well.